All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Dunk on AP podcast. Today we are talking economics in the global age, as well as calls for reform, topics 9.4, 9.5 of AP World. So without further ado, let's go dunk on AP. So let's talk to start off with the different global macroeconomic trends in modern world history. So mercantilism goes from the 15th to 17th century, capitalism goes from the 18th to 19th century, and obviously still exists. Then the debates over capitalism is with communism versus capitalism engulfed the Cold War. Then you've got Keynesian economics from the 1920s and 1930s, and to some extent, those still exist as well. Remember, that's the New Deal economics, the idea that the government should intentionally spend more than it has to grease the wheels of the economy. And then you've got neoliberalism beginning in the 1970s. So let's start off with a little explanation for these guys, especially neoliberalism. So this is an economic theory advocating for free markets and minimal government intervention. So it comes along with, and its core principles are market liberalization, allowing goods, services, and capital to move freely across borders without tariffs or restrictions. Privatization, transferring ownership of businesses or services from the public sector, the government, for the private sector, for businesses. It also comes along with deregulation, removing laws and regulations that restrict the way businesses can operate. Then it also comes along with fiscal austerity, cutting government spending, particularly on social programs. So they're not a big fan of social programs that give government handouts. So neoliberalism in the U.S., President Ronald Reagan's Reaganomics, which came along with major tax cuts such as the Economic Recovery Act of 1981, it led to aggressive deregulation of industries such as banking, healthcare, and transportation. The basic idea with Reaganomics is cut taxes on the rich so that the money will trickle down to the rest of the workers. This is famously known as trickle down economics or supply side economics. So it also, though, increased military spending, but it led to spending cuts on food stamps, welfare, and job training. So some effects of Reaganomics: it led to economic recovery and gross domestic product growth. It also led, though, to a widening of the income gap and the rise of the national debt. The financial and corporate deregulation set the stage for the savings and loan crisis in the 80s and 90s. But mainly, it led to a great economy, and Ronald Reagan is still widely hailed as a hero president on the conservative side of the political aisle. Now, Margaret Thatcher, who was the Prime Minister of the UK from 1979 to 1990, she fundamentally transformed the British economy. She privatized state owned enterprises, including the British Telecom, British Gas, British Airways, and British Steel. This led to what she called Big Bang, or what was called Big Bang deregulation of 1986. There were reductions in income tax rates, and there were big public spending cuts, and she introduced laws to reduce the power of trade unions. So, under Pinochet, though, in Chile, neoliberalism looks different. He comes to power with the military coup in 1973. He privatized utilities, banks, and significant parts of the mining, pension, and healthcare systems. This significantly deregulated the economy, particularly in the financial sector. It also opened up its economy to international trade by reducing trade barriers. Reforms also weaken labor unions, and it's going to simplify and reduce taxes, particularly for business and higher income groups. And again, you see a little bit of the trickle down economics happening there. Now, some of the effects of Pinochet's rules or his policies are going to be that the initial economic instability, there is an initial economic instability and recession in 1982 to 1983. And there is post-crisis economic growth, though. Also, there is increased foreign investment because of the deregulation of taxes and things like that, and tariffs. It's going to lead to the privatization of pensions. It's also going to lead to a dramatic increase in income inequality. But there's going to be long-term stability. Chile's economy became one of the most stable and prosperous in Latin America. So there's also economic liberalization in China. Deng Xiaoping, his economic reforms begin in 1978. These were sort of market-oriented reforms with a socialist framework, so not completely neoliberal, but this is definitely not as communist as Mao Zedong almost certainly would have liked had he been alive. But by 1978, he's dead. So this also dismantles the people's communes, and it develops special economic zones, or SEZs. also led to reformed state-owned enterprises and did not privatize them. So not everything is neoliberal. So a good example of special economic zone is Shenzhen. So these are special economic zones are geographically designated areas within a country that are subject to unique economic regulations different from other regions within the same country. Shenzhen was the first SEZ in China, and it was established in 1980, and it was chosen for its location next to the British colony of Hong Kong. So the four cardinal principles here of China's really its more modern economy: the principle of upholding the socialist path, the principle of upholding the people's democratic dictatorship, the principle of upholding the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party, the principle of upholding Mao Zedong thought in Marxism and Leninism. Also, this is just going to be one of many countries that is sort of seeking a economic liberalization after seeing its success in other countries. Brazil will do this in the 1980s and 1990s. You'll see South Korea do it in the 1980s and 1990s. India from 1991 all the way to the modern day. Post-apartheid South Africa is going to do this. Russia in the 1990s will do this after the Soviet Union falls, obviously, and then Turkey in the 1980s. So you're going to see a big shift in global economic landscapes from manufacturing-based economies to knowledge-based economies. So economies that are manufacturing-based economies, like factories and stuff, primarily rely on the production of goods through physical labor and industrial activity. Skilled and unskilled laborers work in production facilities, like I said, factories. In the knowledge economies focus on information, services, and technology. The emphasis is on advanced degrees and specialized skills in fields like IT, finance, engineering, and creative industries. So you're going to see the rise of East Asia in manufacturing. This is obviously something that you know. I'm not telling you something crazy here. That most of the time when stuff gets made, it's going to be made in these Asian countries. So industrial manufacturing shifted away from the US and Europe in the modern day. Japan and the four Asian tigers, namely South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore, are going to be the big centers of production. They specialize in electronics, textiles, and automobiles. And China is going to eventually join this after the 1978 reforms. So the rise of Latin America is also going to happen in manufacturing. So the shift in manufacturing to Latin America in the 20th century was fueled by regional trade agreements that promoted industrial growth, like NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. So this was signed in 1994 between the US, Canada, and Mexico, and manufacturing is going to shift into Mexico from the US and Canada under this agreement. And then Mercosur. This was signed in 1991 between the Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay governments. So the manufacturing sector is going to grow within the bloc by reducing tariffs and fostering greater economic integration. So you're also going to get a big shift to the knowledge economy in Japan. After rapid industrial growth after World War II, Japan is going to shift to a knowledge economy in the 1980s. The government invested heavily in research and development, and Japan is renowned now for its technological innovations, particularly in robotics, electronics, and the automotive industries. Sony, Toyota, and Panasonic are going to be examples of that. You're also going to shift to the knowledge economy in Finland. Finland relies on the Soviet Union for its exports, so the dissolution of the USSR in 1991 negatively impacts the Finnish economy. So the Finnish government invests heavily in education and technology. A leading knowledge economy by the late 1990s, that's going to be Finland. And Nokia, with sustainable technology, clean energy solutions, and environmental engineering services. So you get big shifting economies, like I said, from the more manufacturing based economy sort of economy to the knowledge economy. So you're also in this time going to get multinational corporations. So that's a large company that operates in multiple countries across the globe. These corporations have facilities and other assets in at least one country other than their home country, and they manage production or deliver services in various international locations. Apple, Foxconn, Toyota, Nissan, and Shell are examples of multinational corporations. So now moving to 9.5, calls for reform and responses after 1900. So you're going to get a lot of rights-based discourse in this time. In the late 20th century, there was a significant shift in global and national politics, emphasizing the inherent and universal rights of individuals. This period saw an increased focus on human rights, characterized by advocacy for civil, political, social, economic, and cultural rights. You get in this time the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So the UDHR was established in 1948 after World War II. This was a framework to affirm and protect the rights of all people. It was not a legally binding document, but inspired more than 60 human rights instruments. So there were global feminism movements. Simone de Beauvoir Simone de Beauvoir was a French philosopher and writer who wrote *The Second Sex*, a book that challenged gender roles and helped lay the foundation of modern feminism. Betty Friedan wrote *The Feminine Mystique* in 1963, which explored the widespread unhappiness of women who were trying to conform to the suburban housewife role. You also get UN conferences on women. The first UN World Conference on Women was in Mexico City in 1975. It was dedicated to discussing women's rights and issues globally. The Beijing Declaration and the Platform for Action was adopted in 1995. It detailed objectives on 12 critical areas of concern for women's rights. Also, the United Nations and Women Today. The UN Women was established in 2010. So it's the Sustainable Development Goals, that the UN established. Goal 5 aims to achieve gender inequality and empower all women and girls by 2030. There was also a commission on the status of women. Also, increasing access to education and politics. So, globalization helped accelerate access to education and participation in political processes. Many women gained the right to vote and gained more access to education. So, the 20th century also brought increased equality for different racial, social, and religious groups. So, there were also a lot of women's suffrage movements. There were expanding educational opportunities. The U.S. Civil Rights Act of 1964, which barred discrimination against people because of their gender or because of their race in public places. There's also the end of apartheid in South Africa, and there are also caste reservations in India. So women get the right to vote in the USA in 1920, in New Zealand in 1893, in Brazil in 1932, in Russia in 1917, and in Mexico in 1953. So you also get the end of apartheid at this time. Racial discrimination was dismantled in the early 1990s. This was led by Nelson Mandela and the African National Congress. In 1994, general elections in which all races could participate equally for the first time. You also get the post-apartheid Africa with a more inclusive government. You also get the caste reservation system in India. This was a form of affirmative action in India. So it was adopted in 1950 with the Indian Constitution in 1950. So it provides reserved quotas for specific castes, which traditionally had less access to opportunities in government jobs, educational institution, and legislative bodies. So what you're going to get with this is a quasi end to the caste system and an expanded political participation among these historically marginalized groups. You also get environmental movements, so groups like Greenpeace. They're founded in 1971 in protest against nuclear weapons testing in Alaska. They also gained recognition after sailing a boat into a restricted area of underwater nuclear tests. So there was dual focus on anti-war activism and environmental protection. So in the 1970s and 1980s, they focused on anti-whaling efforts, particularly against Japanese and Soviet whalers. Also, the anti-sealing campaign that exposed the practice of clubbing baby harp seals for their pelts in Canada. Then they targeted electronic manufacturing in East Asia for the use of toxic chemicals, and there were various campaigns against fossil fuels. Then you get the Green Belt movement. So what happens here is the Greenbelt Movement was an environmental organization founded in 1977 by Wangari Maathai in Kenya to promote conservation and empower women through the planting of trees. So the three big tenets here to know: environmental conservation, women's empowerment, sustainable development. So 51 million trees were planted. Thousands of women and girls trained in forestry, food processing, and beekeeping, and Maathai won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2004. So, and then the World Fair Trade Organization, or the WFTO, was established in 1989, the global network of organizations representing the fair trade supply chain from producing to exporters, wholesalers, and retailers. So, this connects disadvantaged producers in developing countries with markets worldwide. Ben and Jerry's is an example of a country committed to fair trade practices. So that's everything that you need to know for key trade, for the key ideas from 9.4 and 9.5. Please let me know if you have any questions.